Hi everyone. So let's get back to it. We've got quite a bit of stuff to go through, so we might just quickly get through some of that. We might have to skip a few topics because I think we have quite a lot to cover. So I might just quickly let's skip this one. I just wanted to show you guys a quick example here, which talk about querying the registry. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through some of the interesting forensic artifacts that we can look for with Velociraptor. I'm just going to be a bit brief on this. So the Windows registry, I mean, you guys all know what the Windows registry is about. And we have two ways of accessing the registry. We can use the APIs with the registry accessor, or we can parse the raw registry hives for using a registry parser that's built in. So the example I wanted to show you guys today was Windows event logs, and that's a very common thing that people need to look for when they're doing DFIR work, because Windows event logs are actually really important for we rely on them a lot in forensics and incident response, but many people don't know that it's actually really easy to disable the event logs. So let's look at this example that quickly shows how we would try and figure out use of the bits client. So bits is it's a Windows background intelligent transfer service. It's often used by attackers to download payloads because it's a built-in part of Windows that we can use to to download anything really. So let me show you an example. So if I go in here and let me just copy this. All right, if I do this download priority, so this command, just quickly get that. Okay, so this command will just download, using the Bits client, will download a payload from Google. Bits usually is used for downloading various Windows updates and things like that. But I can actually use it to download anything. And because it's a signed service and part of Windows, it just works, right? I'm actually able to write this file, right? Yep. So this is what I just downloaded. So this is how attackers usually download their payload, and usually it's pretty easy to detect that because there's an event, a Windows event that is generated when you do that, and it's usually stored in a Windows event logs, right? So this is a pretty normal thing to do, and a lot of EDR solutions or even when we're doing forensics. Oh, the video's off. Okay, yeah, yeah. Even if we're doing forensics, then we could look at the event logs and find activity of Bits clients. So here we go. We're going to look for. I'll show you activity of the Bits clients. And there's a log file here, and that tells us whenever Bits downloaded something. So you can actually see there's several events, but you can see that this event shows us that Bits was downloading from google.com, and that normally would be like in a malware site or whatever. And so that is a very strong signal. And a lot of EDRs, they might forward these logs to a SIEM or something like that. and then use that to detect malicious downloads through the Beats program. So, so it turns out that these logs are crucial, but it's very easy to disable them, right? So I can just go over here and disable the log. So let me show you. So we saw that log file now. What I'm going to do is I'll just clear the log so we can see it again. So we're not going to clear it, clear log. And now I'm going to disable this log, right? And now when I do the bits download again, then obviously no logs are, going to be showing, right? Because we've disabled the log. So it's not that surprising. But if your security solution relies on logs, then we're going to have a problem, right? So what happens when I disable this log, right? It turns out that it's a registry setting somewhere, and it disables this log. So we can actually search for that registry setting and figure out, where it is. So we have this disabled event log artifact. The full blog post, talks about it in here, but there is an artifact that just looks for these settings to see which event logs are disabled and which ones are not. So let's try this out. So we'll collect that from our endpoint. So this is the one, right? And it's going to decide whether it's enabled or disabled. Now, if we launch it, then it's going to go through and check the status of all of the event logs to see if they are enabled or disabled. So there's thousands of event log sources. And if you look at the results, it's going to say enabled or disabled, right? So some of them will be 1, some will be 0. And a lot of them are by default off, so it's hard to tell when a particular one is enabled or disabled, whether it should be enabled or disabled, right? So we can go over here and we can filter. This is our filter button. We can filter on one of those channel names, bits, okay? And that should show us the bits operational. So it's this log file that we're looking at. It is now enabled. So we can see whether it's enabled or disabled, right? So this is the way of being able to check particular setting on an endpoint to see whether it's set correctly or not. So we can see this one's enabled or disabled. So I just wanted to show you. I'm just going to briefly go through that, but you can figure out whether the bits, this particular one, is enabled or disabled. But this is just an example. But what we want to actually do is hunt at scale. So we want to actually collect that artifact from all the machines, or lots of machines, thousands of machines at once. And so this brings me to the next topic, which is hunting. So hunting is what we call when we collect the same artifact from lots of endpoints at the same time. So it's all about mass collection and scale. So there's two types of hunts that we might want to do. The first hunt is we want to be very targeted in our detection. And it's usually like a yes/no answer. So we might say, tell me all the machines that have bits log disabled, right? So it's very targeted. Now that would be okay if you knew that you were looking for the bits log, right, specifically, and that it might be just that one log that is disabled. But if you look at all the thousands of logs that log types that we've got 1,300 rows, right? So some of them are enabled, some of them are not enabled, and we don't know really which ones are supposed to be enabled and which ones are not. So in that case, we want to do a hunt so that we can collect a lot more data and build a baseline. So this is a second approach for hunting. One is for being targeted, and one is to build a baseline. Two different approaches. So I'm going to show you how to start up 100 clients. So the first thing we do is we're going to go into the temp directory, which is, as I mentioned, where Velociraptor stores all its files. In this case, because because we are running this kind of demo mode. And you can have a look and see these are all the files that are created, by Velociraptor, amongst others. But amongst of them, there's going to be a config file, the client config file, which is what we use to configure the clients. So Velociraptor created that as part of this installation. So what we're going to do is we're going to run Velociraptor, and we're going to run it with this configuration file, and we're going to run 100 different clients. So it's just a way of simulating a large deployment easily, right? So I'll have to, hang on. Users test download Velociraptor. And then here, I'm going to copy this command line. All right, so it's going to run Velociraptor with this config file, and it's going to spin up 100 clients. So this is just a way of simulating lots of clients. So you can see that it basically creates 100 keys and starts 100 separate clients, and then it will enroll them. And then we'll see on our system, 100 new clients, even though they're all just kind of local, right? So we can see that right away. We can just search for it, right, and view all the clients, and you can see they're coming up and starting up and so on, right? And as they're enrolling, we will see more details appear on them when we run the interrogate flow on it, and we can start to see what they're doing, right? And we can see more of the details filling up. So they are just 100 clients that are running like in separate threads. They're just different, but they're still running on the same machine, right? Okay, so now we can emulate what it takes to do a hunt, right? So we can go over to the hunt manager. This is the hunt manager. This is what we use to create a new hunt. And what we can do here is we can say, I want you to collect this from all the endpoints at once, right? So we add a new hunt, and we add a description. A description might be log modification. Okay, and this is now here is where we can match by label or match by, so if we can target it specifically to one label or run on everywhere, right? And it tells us how many clients are estimated to be affected. So we're going to run it everywhere. And we're just going to collect the same thing, the log modifications. The event log modification artifact, this one. Right, and this is where we get to configure it. So we can either be very targeted, or we can collect the baseline. So if I collect all the data, then I'm going to have the log status of all the machines, of all the machines of all the event logs, and then I can do querying on that data to figure out if it's good. But if I want to be more targeted, I can just look at the bits ones. So I can do the filtering on the endpoint and then send back less rows, or I can just collect lots of rows. And so these are the two options. So I'm just going to collect the bits client. I just want to see specifically that. So I'm going to launch it, and it's basically going to go off. And when we start the hunt, it starts in the post state. So we're going to start it, right? We run it, and you'll see here, it will start to schedule the hunt on all the machines that are currently connected, and they'll just complete as soon as possible, right? So they're going to go ahead and do it. And yep, so you see we've done 101 machines, and then, and we're basically finished here. Almost there. All right, and so now we can see the data. Now over here, there's a notebook, which I didn't really explain enough about, but it's just a way of us doing post-processing on the data. And we can see that, they're all the same machine, so they're going to show us the same thing. But the bit client operational one, they're all enabled, right? So we can then detect which ones are enabled and which ones are disabled. So I just wanted to show you guys how we do a hunt and how we can target it and get an idea of how many clients were affected. I mean, in this case, if we started 100 machines, now we can look at ones that are recent or not recent. These are basically an estimate of how many machines would be affected. Then we schedule it, and then we collect the results. And now we can actually stack those and post-process the data. Right? I'm going to skip that one because I don't think we have time. So, but you can read it. But basically, we can do VQL queries that group and do the stacking, and then figure out which ones are odd, stand out. All right. So this is hunting, and you can see that hunting is basically the same as just running the collection locally, but just doing it at scale. So it's just as easy and pretty quick. So let's look at some of the other forensic artifacts that we've got. This one's an NTFS artifact. All the NTFS artifacts, there's a lot of them, and I'm sure that you guys are all. This is a forensics conference, so you guys are all experts in NTFS. But I'm just going to show a couple of very small things just to give you a feel to what kind of things are available. So as you know, with NTFS, we've got a master file table, MFT, and that tells us all about all the different files in NTFS. And we've got lots of different attributes, right? So for files, we have standard information, file name, data, and maybe an alternate data stream. And then for folders, we have some index I30s and so on. And we can do searches on the MFT. So this is one of the things, some of the things we want to do on MFT is to look for file names, look for paths, file types, and then content. So we need to so it's sort of similar to the Glob plugin, but it's a lot more thorough because we're seeing all the files that are on the NTFS. This is there's a variety of search of artifacts here. So we can put together all of these plugins and create some interesting artifacts. Okay, so let's do this one, file name search artifact. Now this one is actually super simple, but it's very fast. The idea is that because all the files are on the MFT, then we can just Yarrow scan the MFT for a certain keyword. And if we're looking for a particular file name that's very specific, then if we get a hit in that MFT entry, then we know that's probably in the file name or it's somehow related to this file, right? So we just do a Yarrow rule on an MFT, which takes like seconds. It's very fast because we're not really parsing the MFT. We're just, looking for it. So that is a pretty cool one to do. Very fast, and it's good for file names. If you want to parse the MFT, you can use this artifact, Windows NTFS MFT, and that gives you much better parsing, but it's a lot slower. So it takes maybe 2 minutes or so, but it parses the whole MFT, and then we can filter all the rows, with it. So there is an example here of of a script that we can run that will set up the machine basically with typical NTFS artifacts. So we can try that. So we just copy it, and it's actually a PowerShell script. So we're going to do PowerShell. So actually we're probably finished with this PowerShell. Okay, and we just paste it. So this is our what? All right. Yeah. And then this one. Copy, paste. Okay, what this is going to do is it's going to download these tools from sysinternals, so PSExec, procdump, and so on. And then we're going to emulate, users downloading it from the browser by essentially putting the mark of the web on it, which is the zone transfer ADS, alternate data stream. So this is kind of similar to what it would look like in, if the user downloaded it from the browser. Okay, so, and it's going to be placed in the perflogs directory, which is kind of a usual place for threat actors to hide, their malware and so on, because it's kind of out of the way and nobody really knows, what it is. And then we're going to do a couple of other cool things. We're going to create a resident file. We're going to create a second short name that's very different. Dump calculator, do a memory dump, and so on. And this is basically emulating a threat actor. We're going to take calculator, we're going to take the memory proc dump of it, and then remove them. Oops. So this is a typical type of attack chain where the attacker creates some NTFS artifacts. Here, they take a memory dump, they zip it up, exfiltrate it, then they delete items. So now we'll be able to do some MFT type work to see whether we can detect these activities. Right, so this is an interesting exercise. So we'll start off with the exercise, and we're going to find the contents of the perflogs directory and look at the metadata. And we're going to use this NTFS MFT to do that, right? So the first thing we'll do is let's just collect the MFT from this endpoint. So we're going back to this endpoint. We're going to add MFT. Okay, so we're just going to collect the NTFS MFT from the endpoint. And okay, and these are all the options that we can use, and we can actually filter by path and file and so on, and look at dates and use these to target what we're looking for. So again, a lot of this is about targeting the analysis on the endpoint, so we don't have to collect all that data. For this exercise, we'll just collect it all so that we could learn how to post-process that data. And so you can see there's already thousands of rows coming back, because usually MFTs are pretty big, and will take about quite a long time, maybe 3 or 4 minutes to get that. So we'll just leave that going. And what we can do is we can actually target around the perflogs directory, right? Finding things around the perflogs directory just for this exercise. So we can actually run another one at the same time. You can copy it, and we can filter perflogs. So just to save time, we'll say that because this is going to be our suspicious directory sort of thing. So what that will do is it will also parse the MFT, but as it does that, then it's only really going to emit the files that are found inside of this path, perflogs. Right, and so it goes through. I mean, they're both kind of running at the same time, and eventually, so this one returns the whole MFT, which could take a long time and have a lot of data. And then this one is more targeted. So again, the differences in approaches. Okay, so we should be able to see some of those files that we've created. Let's wait. We don't have time. We have to kind of hurry through. Okay, let's see what's the next slide while this is happening. USN journal. So the other cool thing about NTFS is that we've got the USN journal, which is a journal of modifications to the file system. And that's really super useful. When we create new files, then we end up with USN journal modifications. So Velociraptor will parse our path, and we can filter on the path, and we can parse the USN directly. All right, so okay, so here, okay, these are done. So let me just go back. So here we have the full one is 250,000 rows, so it's quite large, and it has every file on the system, right? And this one has 11 files that are, targeted, and we can see immediately. Let's just turn off some of those less interesting columns, so it's a little bit. Yep. All right, so we've got the perflog file. So these files, and these are the ones that were downloaded there. We've got the zone identifier, so we know that they've been downloaded from the internet. And what have we got? In use, so they're not deleted. And yeah, so we've got a few, these ones are not that relevant, but we can see that we are already finding those files directly, and so we can have the times and so on. So we've got these all of these NTFS attributes that we can look at, and the ADS as well, right? So so it's a lot less to look at, only 11, right? It's much more targeted. But let's look at the USN one now. So let's search for USN journal. Okay, so the USN journal, and we want to know about anything that's happened in the prefetch directory. So here we have the parameters, so we can filter. No, it's not the prefetch, it's, what is it called? Perflogs, sorry, perflogs. Perflogs. Right, so if the file name, actually, the path, somewhere in the path, has the word perflogs, then we want to know about any file modifications inside of this directory. Okay, so when we do this, it's going to parse the USN journal and tell us any entries that are relevant to that directory. So USN journal has, thousands of, events, in it, and it's written all the time, because every time a file is changed, something's happening, right? It's changing. So when we are doing this parse, we are filtering, this artifact is filtering that data on the endpoint. So we're only seeing the things that are relevant to us. Okay, so we'll let that kick off, and let's see what it comes back with. Yeah, so even like a simple, this is what it sort of looks like once it's done, is that we'll be able to see the reason for the file being, created, and anytime it's deleted and things like that. Let's see if we've got any data. No, it's still processing. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Yeah, so that's the USN journal. We can look and see which files are. You can group by the path to see whether all the unique files that were updated in that directory. I'm going to skip this alternate data stream. I'm going to skip this build engine. We might go back to it if we have some time, because we're just kind of running out of time. Yeah. All right. I'm just going to talk about memory artifacts now. Yeah, but let's go back to that USN results, and you can see here we filtered the USN journal, and we're just looking for things that are relevant to the perflog, and we can see files were deleted, files were closed, and so on. So we actually can see a lot of activity. This is our exfil zip. It was created and it's been exfilled and deleted. See, it's been deleted. So we actually can see in the USN journal a lot of activity of files that were already deleted. They're just recorded in there. And that gives us a good idea of, something that happened. What happened there? So we use that to kind of answer questions about, what was the activity. All right, let's go back to memory. All right, so memory artifacts. So you must have heard about memory forensics and recovering artifacts through memory. So memory forensics is kind of an interesting idea because a lot of threats are memory resident only, right? Because we don't necessarily touching files on disk. So for instance, you might have a process, it's injected into another process, and then it runs in memory and it's not really written to the disk. So if we pull out the power, system goes down, there's no more evidence, and we kind of lose that. So traditionally, people have, done a lot of memory analysis to try and find these things, these memory-only things. So, and typically, they'll take a memory image, then use volatility or recall to parse the memory image. But the reality is that memory analysis is just not very good, right? It's just very low quality generally because the evidence in the memory itself is not very it's not very solid. There's a lot of obstacles to getting good memory analysis, like smear, and you have to be really lucky. So in most cases, it's not really that useful. And I think that there are better ways to find this evidence, to find this information. So I'm going to show you an example here where we can detect things in memory. And the typical example that people use is this Cobalt Strike, which is the most common attack tool that's used out there by ransomware groups and threat actors and things like that. And Cobalt Strike is actually it's a very good tool. It has very good features, in terms of the offensive capabilities are very impressive. And one of the nice things that it can do is it can inject itself into another process. So the only way to detect it is with memory detections, because you can only really see it inside the memory of another process because it's not written to disk. So we're going to show an example here where we're going to use this tool called inject to inject. It's not the real Cobalt Strike. It's just a sample of that has the same Yara signature as a Cobalt Strike. So we use that for testing, and we can use that to inject it into another process. So this is an example of doing this. So inject.exe. So this is how you use it. I've got it downloaded here. Users test download. Okay, and I've got my loader. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start up Task Manager. Okay, click more details. All right, and I'm going to start Notepad. So I'm going to see Notepad here, and this is the process I'm going to target. Okay, and ID is 5492. That's here. So I can use this loader. Okay, if I just run it with no arguments, -H. Yeah. Then it tells me I have to give it a PID, right? So the PID was again 5492. 5492. What this is going to do is this tool is basically going to inject a memory sample into the Notepad process that would normally be like a Cobalt Strike beacon, but this is like an inert sample. It's not actually running, it's just in there, right? And it's not, I'm not sure if it's not the real beacon, it's just a sample of several beacon type signatures, but it's going to be running inside of this process. So the only way really to detect it is to detect it running inside the memory of this process. Now we can do the full memory analysis thing, take the full memory dump and then scan it, and then do the volatility thing, and then find it. But that is usually not super reliable. Memory dumps don't work all the time. Reconstructing memory might not work because there's too much smear, lots of things like that. So, but with Velociraptor, what we can do is we can scan the memory directly on the endpoint of the process memory. So we don't really need to download it. Also, memory analysis is not really that useful for large servers because, we've got servers with 512 gigs of RAM now. It's pretty normal. So in that, when you have a memory analysis, when you try to do memory analysis on a server of that size, it's basically, there's no point, right? Because it's too big and you're going to get so much smear that it's not going to work. So it's much more important to do the analysis on the machine itself. And what we can do is we can search for the signature in memory. Now we have this artifact here called the Windows Detection Yara process. And what that does is it allows us to run Yara rules against memory. So let's find that. So Windows Detection Yara process. Oh, that's the Linux one. This one. Okay, so this one is going to detect the Yara expression in memory. Now we can give it different Yara rules, right? But this Yara rule, the default one, is actually a Cobalt Strike one, so it's fine. We can also just upload a Yara rule to it or whatever, and we can target it to a specific process. Now I can run it on all the processes. It will take a little while, but just to save time, I'm just going to target to Notepad specifically, because that will make it, but it will make it much faster, but it's the same thing, right? Okay, so basically I just launch it and it's going to go off and it's going to scan the Notepad memory. It's going to pick up, right, the Yara rules that that matched. And you can see here immediately I've got a hit, right? And this is my hit. There's the Yara rule. It matched into the memory of Notepad, right? So, so that's cool. So now I know Notepad has, has the Cobalt Strike beacon in it. So what else can we do with this? So we've got a hit in memory. We can dump the memory as well. That's one of the arguments to the. So I can go in here and get a memory dump. Upload hits. So that will upload a memory dump of the process memory. Let's do that as well. And you can use Windows debugger to look at it and do memory analysis that way. It just takes out the whole memory dump of the process, which can be large, but only if there's a Yara hit. Or we can go the next step and try and analyze the memory directly. So one of the things that we want to get out of memory when we have this kind of detection is we want to get information about the type of attack that happens. So we want to know, in the Cobalt Strike's case, what the configuration of Cobalt Strike was. Where was it talking to? What was the CNC? These kind of things. So it turns out that you can actually parse Cobalt Strike beacon out of memory. It's not easy, and it's actually obfuscated quite heavily, but it's possible to do. And I like to show this as an example of a very advanced type of VQL artifact. So there is a VQL artifact which carves out Cobalt Strike configuration. See, so we uploaded the memory dump. But let's go and add the Cobalt Strike carver, right? And that applies to memory or disk. And essentially it looks for things that kind of look like a Cobalt Strike config, and then it tries to decode them. So in this case, we're going to target it to Notepad as well. And yep, and then we basically launch it. So it's going to go and do the same thing that we did before, we just memory scan. But when it finds the Yara signature for Cobalt Strike, then it will attempt to decode it. And I just wanted to show you the type of data that it can extract by decoding the notepad. So it's telling us some metadata about the actual process that's running, what is it, but then it goes on and detects things like the C2 server, all the different configuration. And that is actually really important for us to now go and say, oh, look, this is the pipe name, so now we can look for, because Cobalt Strike allows you to configure all these things. So it makes it very hard to detect in the real world, because all of these things can be changed. So it doesn't really have like a constant signature. But if we extract the configuration in one particular campaign, then we can use that to leverage that. Now we can start to look for things like, pipes, endpoints, IPs, and so on. We have a question. How do we know it's Notepad and other application? So normally you wouldn't. So you would actually do it on all the processes, right? Which I can do it. It will take a little bit longer, right? So you can use the first one, Yarrow process, as like a first level pass, or you can just do it like this. I mean, I can just do it. It will just take longer. So just for today, so we can do all processes. Process regex is dot and go. So yeah, so you can still do it on all the applications, all the processes. It just takes longer, right? But just for today, I wanted to show you this pretty quick. So yeah, so now we can target for those things. We can look for pipes. We can look for C2 servers, and so on. So this is actually really, really cool. But the other cool thing that I wanted to show you about how this is working, how this artifact works, is that we have, so it uses this parsing framework to analyze the memory. And if you've ever done like volatility or recall, it's the same kind of idea. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. Having like these, this kind of V types. It's called, in volatility, it's called V types, but it's just like a data-driven parser type thing. So in other words, you can write the same type of parsers that you can write in volatility or recall directly in VQL, and you can see that is the artifact. It's quite large, and it's probably, like, I would say it's one of the most advanced artifacts in Velociraptor. But it just shows how far you can take the VQL as a language to get some really, really sophisticated type of analysis. All right, yeah. So that was kind of a cool one. All right, let's what have we got? So we have about 50 minutes, 40 minutes. Okay, so I just wanted to show you monitoring. So that was the forensic side of Velociraptor, which is kind of cool, but there's a lot more in Velociraptor. So we're going to talk about monitoring now. So what is monitoring? So we talked about VQL, and we said that, and you remember that I mentioned that VQL was a streaming service, so streaming query language, in the sense that when we run a query, and if the query takes a long time, as soon as we find something, right, then those rows are sent to the server right away. Like, we don't have to wait till the end. We just send them as we get them. So this is why it's streaming the results back. Now, we can take that idea to the extreme and say, well, okay, what about if we had a query that just never ever finished? It just continually ran forever. And every time it found something, then it emitted a row, right? So then what we could do is we could take that row and then send it to the server immediately. And then we can look at it right away, right? Because this thing never finishes, it continually runs. And so and now it becomes an event query, right? So if the plugin runs, and let's say it just runs forever, right? And every time something happens, it emits a row, and then the row goes into the rest of the query, and then, it could get filtered or whatever. Then we have some batching here, and then it gets sent to the server partially. And so as long as the plugin sends the row in response to something, an event, then the server will be notified of this event, soon after, right? Because there's some batching, so not immediately, but soon after. So that becomes, and the query never ends. It's continuously running. So that becomes an event query. So what we have to do is we can basically tell the client, run all these queries, and whenever an event happens, then forward the results, because so they don't really have a timeout. So not exactly the same as the current set of as what we've seen before. We call it an event table because it's just a big table of queries to run, and it just runs them, right? So we can do that, use that for monitoring, and we can use it for response. So we can actually use it to respond to something by itself autonomously, like kill a process or quarantine a machine or whatever, or we can use it to just forward events to the server as a monitoring. So let's have a look at an example of just monitoring, right? So this one is sysmon collection. So sysmon is a very common, event source. It's got a kernel driver, it installs in Windows, and it just reports things like process execution, DNS, whatever. There's a whole bunch of events that it reports. And we're just going to talk about how we can configure Velociraptor to do sysmon collection. So what we're going to do is we're going to go onto this part down here called client events. This is how we manage client events. So it doesn't look like much, but this button here allows us to add new events to the event table, right? And the client events are targeted by labels. So different label create label groups, right? And then we can target different groups to monitor different things, right? So it all works around labels. So in this case, there is the all label, which, all the machines, fall into it. And then we have the dev level and quarantine level. The dev level is, remember, the one I added before. The quarantine label, I'm not going to talk about, but it's basically where machines that become quarantined. But then here, the all label, it has one artifact. So by default, Velociraptor creates a single artifact, an event artifact, that runs on all the machines. This is just the default. You can turn it off if you don't want it, but this is the one that populates that telemetry that I showed you before of the CPU and memory use and that kind of thing. So this is the all. So this will run on all the clients, right? So I'm going to go over here just for this. I'm just going to run this artifact on all the clients, and I'm going to do sysmon, right? So over here, I have sysmon log forwarder, right? So this artifact will log forward sysmon events. So it's client event artifact. It's not a client artifact, it's an event artifact. And also it actually brings along with it, we haven't talked much about tools, but it's a way of bringing along, your own binaries, that the sysmon binary and the config. And then it basically goes off, installs it, and runs it. So we can configure it a little bit, but we just launch it. Off we go, and it's going to push sysmon out to the endpoint and start it. So as part of that, and then sysmon will start forwarding events, and then I'll just show you the artifact again because I turned it off too quickly. Log forward. So all this artifact does is it just forwards the events. It doesn't do anything else. So the first part, it installs it, and then it uses ETW, which we'll talk about in a minute, to just kind of like listen to all these events from sysmon and just forward them. That's all it's doing. It's just selecting these rows. That's it. So if we look back at our client events here, then again we're only looking at this one client, right? And then we can see that there are some artifacts here, right? Including this one, log forward. And we can immediately see some events already being forwarded. If we just change to the log, then we can see what's happening. You'll see that it basically downloads the sysmon binary and then installs it and starts forwarding the events. Now, the way that this UI works, it's a little bit confusing, but basically there's a timeline, right? So that cursor here is the time. And then we are only looking, and so the table here, it starts here, and it shows us any event after that cursor, right? So you see, because I'm moving it here, but the first event's here. So it doesn't matter, right? The next event available is the one here. So, you know, it's, so what I'm seeing here is the next 10 events from, you know, from this time sort of forward, right? And I can click on the day or the hour to zoom in and out, right? So, okay. So that's like 5 to 6, right? And then these are the minutes. So as the, you know, as the event works, there's going to be more events, and then it basically at each time of the cursor moving, it's the next event available, and that starts the table, and it will go up to whatever the table, 10, 20, 50, you know, however many we want. So we can increase that to like 100, you know, to see the next 100 rows, that kind of thing. So if we actually look at the raw data, then we'll see these are all the execution. Well, it's not necessarily execution. So this is event ID 22, which I think is a DNS. So this one shows the DNS lookups, right? And so on, right? So as the system's working, we're getting more events forwarded. So this is just simple, straight out event forwarding, but it's done using an event query, just to illustrate what an event query does. And we can see this slide just sort of shows us how this works. All right, now we can also do things like use these event monitoring as a detection. Usually event monitoring is used for detection. So we've seen before in the first part of the workshop that we can use Velociraptor artifact to detect when something is wrong, when something is unusual, right? And we've used it, and we've seen that when something's unusual is when it's changing, something's changing. So what we can do is we can detect the moment of change, and then we can say, hey, that should not be changing. That's very unusual. And then that becomes a detection. So the example that I have here is looking back at the, if you recall, the first part of the presentation where we turned on and off this bits client operation. We just hit enable log, disable log, right? So we said that when we had an artifact, and when that ran, we knew that the state was enabled or disabled. But just looking at one snapshot in time, it's not really enough to tell us, okay, this is suspicious. But if you look at the snapshot, you know, over time, and then you say, hey, suddenly it's changed from enabled to disabled. What happened, right? Why should it disabled? That's unusual. That's a detection, right? So this is where time evolution becomes really important, right? So what we can do is we can create an artifact, an event artifact that looks for changes in this thing. And what we do is we use this thing called a diff plugin, which detects a difference. So it runs this multiple times and then looks for differences. And then whenever there's a difference, that's an event. So it sends us an event. So it's basically watching for change on the endpoint, right? So you can see that this is the query. It basically just runs the same kind of thing as the event log modification, looking at the registry and so on, but it looks for keys that are changed. All right, so again, we don't really need to care that much about the query itself. We just add it. So let's add it. Okay, so we're just going to select it, and this is this is an event version of that other artifact, right? And it's going to look for it every 60 seconds, but, you know, just for this workshop, we're going to change this to, you know, 6 seconds, just because, you know, we wanted to see it a little quicker. So every 6 seconds is going to basically check the registry keys and see whether they've changed, right? So yeah, so all we do is we launch that thing, and off it goes. You know, we're getting more process events and so on. So now we should be able to see, yeah, this one, event log modifications, right? So if we look at the query logs again, then it's telling us, yep, it's running the query, and so on. It's telling us like I checked it, right? So let's go back. So so far nothing happened, right? Because there was no difference, no change. But now when I go and change the event log, let's say I disable this log now, disable, right? So it's changed the registry key. So what happens is that now that detection triggered, right? Because it noticed that the keys changed because it ran the query across all the keys and said, hey, this key is now disabled, right? Enabled 0. And it's telling us the difference between the two rows. So we actually can tell that this was switched off, yeah? That this event log source was switched off. So now we've got a detection, right? And if I go and turn it again on, enable, right, then it should detect that it's been switched on. Unless we are, we are, oh yeah, we are, yeah. So it's detected it's switched on. So it takes a few seconds to detect it because it's doing it every 6 seconds, right? And this is where the balance of, when you're doing a diff plugin type thing, it's the balance of, how quickly, the more frequently you check, the more CPU you end up using, right? And so, you're locked down at it because every time you check, you're doing something, so you have to check. So if you don't mind about, if the log is not going to be disabled for less than 6 seconds, you don't care, then you can push that out to maybe a minute. That's not too bad. All right, so this is, but anyway, this is the idea of turning it into a detection. It's good for slow changes, right? When something changes slowly. All right, the last topic that I wanted to talk about is the process tracker. And this is really kind of interesting. This is a really new feature that just came out a few weeks ago. But it's actually really cool, very interesting, and very exciting. So let's think about more philosophically, right? Like, this is a digital forensics conference, right? But let's ask, I'm going to be like a little bit of the devil's advocate here and say, well, what's the point of forensics? What are we trying to do? What's the whole point, right? And forensics is quite a lot of fun, right? It's you're looking at all these artifacts, looking at the prefetch, you're looking at the USN journal, at the parsing these, MFTs and all these things. But at the end of the day, who cares? Why are we doing this, right? What's the point? Well, what we're really trying to do with forensics is answer questions about what happened, right? What happened on the system in the past, and why we even need to ask these questions, right? In a perfect world, we could just rewind the tape and see, what happened, right? So we could just rewind back time and look. But the problem is that we didn't have the cameras on, when the event happened. So we don't have the information in the first place. That's why we have to use forensics. So forensics is like a last resort. It's what we do when we don't have the information, right? Because if we had it, then we wouldn't need it. We wouldn't need forensics. Now, in a perfect world, we wouldn't even need it, right? We just have all the answers. What happened? Oh, well, this happened because we have perfect logging, we have perfect capture, perfect recall, everything works, right? So this is the ideal world. The real world is not ideal. So we have to understand that forensics is limited, right? It's limited, it's inherently, right? Because we're really kind of lucky that there are accidents that happen to be on a system where forensic artifacts are left behind by accident, because no one really wanted to leave anything behind, right? It's a side effect of something that happened, right? So we don't have, so it's better not to use forensics. This is going to be my heretic point of view here. If you can help it, it's better not to rely on forensics, right? And this is why, like the same thing that I mentioned before with memory analysis. Memory analysis is good when you don't have the proper tools to capture system state. So you have to do what you have to do and get it from memory. But it's a last resort. By the time you get there, it's too late, and you got to be lucky, right? So it's better to actually have that information. So what we can do with Velociraptor is because it's always running on the endpoint, is we can actually turn on that camera. We can turn on that recording and understand what's going on, what happens, what is happening, and so we can come back and ask Velociraptor, what happens? So we don't need to rely on forensics. And this is really kind of very cool, like philosophy, right? So let's look at tracking processes. Tracking processes is really important. One of the most important things when you take a memory image or look at a process and you see this weird process going on, and you're like, well, this is a suspicious process. How did it get there? Where did it come from? And that question is really important because either it was interactively started, like someone laterally moved into the machine and started Cobalt Strike. So that where did it come from question is going to tell us how did they get in? How did they compromise the machine in the first place? Was there a vulnerability in an application? These kind of things. Or was there a persistence mechanism? Did it start from, scheduled tasks? Did it start from whatever persistence is, right? So this question is really important. Where did it come from? That is really important because we need to be able to patch up the original hole. So that's why we really need that. But so what we could do is we could collect all process execution events from the endpoint all the time. And we can say, well, what was the parent process of this process? Where did it start from? Where did it come from? So in order to answer those questions, we could just collect everything. And we have huge amounts of volume of logs that we have to ship, off the endpoint. And it turns out that 99.9% of these events, no one cares. They're not interesting, right? Because, there's just normal operation of the system. It's that 1% that is interesting that relates to that particular process that we've determined is suspicious. So that is what a lot of EDR solutions do. They just record lots of stuff and send it off, right? And that's fine, but it's limited because there's always a balance of how much we're collecting versus how much we're sending, and this pre-filtering is not helping. So what we can do is we can track these processes locally. So we don't really want to ship that data out. We just want to keep track of it so that if we determine at a later stage that the particular process is interesting for whatever reason, then we can immediately enrich that with that context that we need. Where did it come from? Where did the process come from? But otherwise, we just throw the data away. We don't really care about it. We don't need to forward it to the server. We can just manage it locally. So this is really what the process tracker is about. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to enable it. So it's only an optional component. So we're going to enable it. And what it does is it actually tracks sysmon functions, and it is an event artifact. So it looks for events, right, which are process start events. And we'll just search for tracker. All right, so it's going to be the process tracker. There's two flavors of it, the basic one or the other one. So we can choose this, or, one or the other. This one uses sysmon. This one doesn't use sysmon. So the two versions. Because we have sysmon on, we'll use the sysmon one. It is better. And all we do is off we go. We just call it, and it will start tracking processes. So it's an event artifact. It listens to process start events and tracks them. So now that we've got it ready, let's simulate a typical attack. All right. So we're going to simulate an attack that's fairly typical. So what we would do is, first of all, so I'm in my downloads directory here. First of all, what I'm going to do, psexec. I'll just download psexec. I think we had it in the beginning. This one, psexec, right? So we can download that. Yep. And now what I'm going to do, so here it is. Now, psexec is a typical process that we can use to do privilege escalation. And it allows us to run, let me just quickly, where was I? Somewhere here, oh yeah. Okay, so psexec allows us to privilege escalate. So with this one, it basically gives us system level access. It escalates to system. So let's do that. Copy. All right. So that's going to It's PSExec 64, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, agree. So that will create a system level shell. So now I'm running a system. This is fairly typical for an attacker, right? And then I'm going to do some stuff, right? For example, I might ping something. So that emulates like, calling to the network or something, right? I'm going to do some stuff. I'm going to do like download some things. I'm going to download some stuff, which, maybe I'll use curl to download my payload to this endpoint. Download my endpoints, going to hack some stuff. And then I'm going to run my Cobalt Strike beacon, leave it running so I can get back in, right? So for this example, we're going to pretend, let me just turn this notepad off. We're going to pretend that notepad is my, suspicious process. So it's kind of running in the background here. It's a system, so it doesn't have a display, but it is running. And then I'm going to exit from my PowerShell and go away. So I've got my backdoor install, it's running, right? So if I look at my task manager here, notepad, then I've got notepad running a system, right? This is going to be like our malicious, binary, which we pretend. And usually when you come up to a system, you do an IR and you're looking at it and you're like, okay, that looks pretty suspicious. And maybe we're going to get, Cobalt Strike hit on this process. We're like, hey, that's weird. But the next question is like, where did it come from? How did it get there? Because this is where we need to establish, how did it start? So normally we would look for the parent of the process to see where it started. And I'm just going to screenshot here of something like Process Hacker, which shows us, the process tree in a UI. So this is like a typical, process tree. Zoom in. So we can see like Velociraptor was started by the command with Explorer and so on. But when it comes to, this particular one, the notepad.exe, we can't really see any parents. It's not really attached to anything. And the reason is because the parent has exited. So what is happening here is that this tool, Process Hacker, uses the API to figure out the parent process, which parent started, which child, and that kind of thing. And what happened is the API is limited because the API doesn't know about exited or finished processes, so it can't really tell you about it, right? So it doesn't know how to build this tree, and this tree is really important for the context. All right. So what we can do is we can use generic system PS tree, right? So PS tree is going to be our how we are building our process tree. So let's try this with Velociraptor. So we're going to start our PS tree. And what we're going to do is we're going to include the visualization, PS tree visualization. So I'll just tick this checkbox here. And we'll just show all the processes, it's fine. And what that does is it instantly goes out and fetches the process tree of the endpoint, right? So 176 rows, right? So we can look at it and we can see all these different rows, right? And we know that the notepad is the suspicious one. So let's filter that with exe notepad. In this case, let's just suppose that's the case, right? So immediately we can see these notepad.exes are suspicious. This one, not so much, because it started from Explorer, so that's pretty normal. But this one is immediately suspicious, right? Because it starts from services, and we have PSExec and starts PowerShell and Notepad, right? So this actually indicates to me that it's laterally moved, and it's also running a system, really not very normal, and right, and then we've got, and it is still running, right? The end time is is 0 basically, so it's still continuing to run, right? And so it started from PSExec. So this is immediately suspicious to me, right? So then the question is, okay, so how did this work? How did Velociraptor tell us the full call chain, whereas Notepad, Process Hacker couldn't? And the reason is because this PowerShell and this PSExec, they've exited. They're not there anymore, right? What we're doing is we're actually bringing that back from the data that we collected that we've tracked, right? So the process tracker is filling in those gaps that the API can't fill. So that's really cool because it gives us that context that we need. So we can immediately see that. Now what we're going to do is we can see that there's a PowerShell, right? So it's spawned from PowerShell. So this is the PowerShell. And usually what happens is we have psexec, SVC, right? So that's the process execution. Okay, so what I could do is let me just filter for that. Okay, and that will show me that psexec thing. And I can open the process tree from that, so it's a little bit higher. So I can see that psexec launched PowerShell, and then I can see a whole bunch of things that happened. You know, these are called process siblings. So not parents and not child, they're process siblings. So there are other processes that ran before or after the process of interest. So now we've got the full story, right? So we say, oh, the PowerShell ran, and then the user used the PowerShell, and the cron host normally runs when you are, starting an interactive PowerShell. It's part of that. And then they ran ping, right, at this time. Now look, the start time is this, the end time. So it's already exited, it's finished, right? But we've got it in the tracker, so we know when it started, when it exited. So first they ran the ping, and then they ran the curl, and then they ran the notepad. So this gives us the full, MO of what they did exactly, right? So we have the full thing, and we know what they did before and after they launched that. So this kind of view you can't really get from forensics, because forensics just tells you, like, accidentally. You can tell prefetch, using prefetch you can tell that some things have run maybe, but you can't tell when they didn't run. It's full of holes. It's not as complete. You don't know the parent, you don't know the child. It's difficult, right? So, but the idea here is to just turn it into much more effective, so we're enhancing the forensics, right, by including monitoring as part of that. So that's the kind of exciting new changes in Velociraptor, is to enhance the forensics by doing more event capture and detection. The second example I wanted to show you is the USN journal monitoring. And USN, we've talked about the USN journal before, but the problem with USN journal is that it rolls over pretty quick. So it's really great, and we've seen how in the previous exercise how to use it, but it rolls over really quickly. So in practice, I mean, you could get lucky if there was some activity on it in the last 30 minutes, a couple of hours maybe. If the system is really, really idle, maybe a day, 2 days. But in reality, on most proper systems, I would say the USN journal is not that useful. You can carve it, actually, so you can get a lot more out of it with carving. But again, it's not that reliable. And so we're kind of at the mercy of the limitation of this of this artifact. So wouldn't it really be nice if we could just feed the USN journal to the server, so we don't have to rely on, by accident, that that this USN journal is still not rolled over, right? So it's still alive. So we could do that. What we could do is we could create an artifact, Windows detection USN, and by doing that we can look for specific directories and only just forward those to the server. So here's an example, the users directory. So what we're saying is that anything under the users directory, if there's been any kind of changes, we want to know about it, and then we can forward them to the server. So it's just a matter of enabling the USN one, USN, and configure parameters. Okay, and in this case, that's the default. We can leave that. That's the prefetch file, so we can tell when a prefetch file was updated, which usually indicates like execution or something like that. But you can change that to anything, and then launch. So when that runs, it will tell us whenever something happened, right? So, if I'll do that PS exec again, for example, then because I ran it, it would have entered something into the prefetch file, right? And that would cause a USN journal entry to appear. And now we should be able to see it as a USN journal entry that is forwarded. And I think it only forwards it every minute, I think. Oh yeah, here we go. So there's one here, right? So we've got some prefetch. So you see sysmon prefetch was modified, and so on. So we can tell, and then there's sysmon actually launches sc.exe, so we have that modification. So in this case, we're only looking for prefetch file modifications. So this is essentially also an execution log, but it's just an example. You can use all kinds of filters there to get like all kinds of notifications when these kind of files appear on the file system. And this is all powered by the USN journal. So it doesn't really matter if it rolls, right? Because when it rolls, we've already sent those events to the server. We're sort of streaming them in real time. So that's another example. Yeah, we have, there's ETW. Don't know if we have time really to do that. Yeah, we probably run out of time to cover ETW really well. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we've got like I don't know, 7 minutes. I'm just going to show you this example here with parent spoofing detection. Yeah, this is pretty cool. So I won't mention ETW too much, but I'll talk about parent-child spoofing. So we talked about parent-child spoofing before when I talked about the process tracker. And parent-child spoofing is so useful, and we use it all the time. But the problem is that it is not very reliable because it's very, very easy to spoof this thing. And people don't necessarily realize it, but it's been known for ages. Since you see this blog post from 2009 that this tool was released that allows us to essentially spoof parent-child relationship. So here, I'll show you an example. So in this case, what we're going to do is run select my parent, start Notepad, and then have it as the process ID as we can attach the process to any other parent. So like in this example, we're running select my parent and telling it to run notepad.exe and claim, so spoof, the parent ID as 2488, which is sysmon, something like that. So we just pick something like that. This is really useful for an attacker because a lot of security tools like sysmon or a lot of security tools, generally they do sometimes run other programs like PowerShell and other things, and some of the things that they do is sometimes suspicious as well. So a lot of the false positives that come through, if they're not even turned off, some people just do like whitelist as well. Like this this sysmon.exe launched this PowerShell command, or like normally you would say, hey, why is this PowerShell being launched? It's kind of suspicious, but a lot of the time, if a security tool is doing it, they're like, oh yeah, okay, that's probably fine. So if you run your tool and make it look like your parent is really some other tool, like a security tool that's inherently kind of, I guess, more trusted, then the SOC, people at the SOC will probably miss it because they'll go, oh, it's probably fine, right? Even if they get an alert. But more than likely is that the alert could be suppressed anyway because they normally allow these security tools to do pretty much anything. So so this kind of example shows how we can launch Notepad and claim that it came from sysmon, and most people will look at that and go, that's probably fine. but of course, if you know Sysmon, you know, like Sysmon itself doesn't launch anything, right? But it could be, you know, like something else, Carbon Black or whatever, and it may launch PowerShell for whatever reason. And so a lot of people will just dismiss that. So how can you detect this kind of spoofing? It turns out that this kind of spoofing happens, you know, at a very low level. This happens at the API, and it's kind of part of Windows, and you really can't detect it that well, as far as I know. I mean, even Sysmon itself, Sysmon has a parent. It tells you the parents. That's how we get our process tracker information from. But even it doesn't know. So it tells you the wrong thing. So this is the event that came from that spoof attack. And it actually also tells you command line notepad came from Sysmon 64. So Sysmon itself doesn't detect it. And so because a lot of detections rely on Sysmon or Sysmon-like kind of drivers, it's actually difficult to detect it to detect process spoofing. And this is Cobalt Strike. This is part of their YouTube training video. And Cobalt Strike actually has that built in. So they don't really need to use Select My Parent. It's part of their tools. So they can actually, as part of their you know, attack tool, is that they can easily just, you know, inject themselves under another process. And that makes it very hard to detect. So it's been known for a while, and it's not even a secret, and most of the attack tools use it anyway. So, you know, it seems that we are kind of ignoring because it's a hard problem. It turns out that there is one way that you can detect it using this ETW provider, which I didn't talk about ETW, so just ignore that. But it turns out that in Velociraptor, there is an artifact that you can use to detect this process spoofing, which is this one. It's on the exchange, and we can add that as well to detect process spoofing. Let's see, paste there. And so when we turn that on, then it will basically start off and look for, where was it? Here. Look for this kind of process spoofing behavior. So if I do that process spoofing, so here I have, let's select my parent, and I'm going to start notepad.exe, and I'm going to attach it to something like really like one of the Chrome processes, 3320, let's say. So when I run it, okay, it will create a new notepad process. Now you can see that, you can see it here, right? 3323. And then if we look for notepad, well, that's the other one that I had from before. How did it start it? Process created 12632. Notepad. Still that one. I think it might be blocked. Oh no, here we go. So we can detect that. I think it started and stopped, but we can detect it using this artifact. So we have the suspicious process, right, which is notepad, right? And then we're saying that is really where it started from. Select my parent. So it really started from this process, but we're claiming that this is the parent, right? So this is actually the only way I know to detect this kind of parent spoofing. So I guess what I'm saying here is that, you know, this is a pretty cool exercise of, again, detection based on ETW. There's some false positives because UAC also does sort of the same thing, but it's not that common, and you can usually filter those out with whitelist, so it's not too bad. All right, so let's finish it. I think we are right. That's right, isn't it? 3:30. Yep. All right, so let's just finish it off. So what do we now cover? Lots of stuff. There's really so much in the tool. We've got Linux, macOS, Windows, FreeBSD. So there's this similar number of artifacts for all of these operating systems. We identify real-time monitoring. There's a lot of stuff. We didn't talk about remediation as well. We can automatically remediate things. And then server automation, monitoring, and Python APIs, lots and lots of stuff. So it's really huge tool. We talk about it for weeks, but hopefully gave you a bit of a taste to what it can do for you, and encourage you to check it out. So if you want to check it out, have a look at our documentation site, the GitHub, and also we are on Discord a lot, so you can jump on Discord and have a chat and check it out. And if you have any questions, then you can just jump on Discord and ask them, or send me an email or whatever. Hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks.